You wake up already behind. There's an inbox to clear, a schedule to follow, and a to-do list that somehow grew overnight. By the time you sit down for 5 quiet minutes, the day already feels like something you're chasing instead of living. Now, picture an ancient human, tens of thousands of years ago, waking up with nothing scheduled at all. No calendar, no job, no deadline waiting on the other side of breakfast. So what did they actually do with an entire day from sunrise to sunset when nothing was forcing them to do anything? The honest answer surprises most people because it isn't constant survival struggle. It's something closer to the opposite. Start with the assumption most of us carry without questioning it. That ancient life was a non-stop grind. Hunting, gathering, defending, repeating, dawn until dusk with barely a moment to breathe. It's a vivid image. It's also, according to research on surviving hunter-gatherer societies, largely wrong. Studies observing communities like the Hadza people of Tanzania, one of the last populations still living a foraging lifestyle similar in structure to ancient humans, found something that upends the grind narrative completely. Adults in these communities typically spend somewhere between 2 and 6 hours a day on activities directly related to acquiring food. Not 12 hours, not sunrise to sunset. A number that, for many people reading this, is shorter than their actual workday. That leave a lot of hours unaccounted for. So where did they go? Rest for one. Real, unhurried rest, not the collapsed exhaustion at the end of a long shift. Observational studies of foraging societies describe long stretches of the day spent sitting, talking, resting in shade, and simply existing without a task attached. Not because they were lazy, because once the food for the day was secured, there wasn't an invented reason to keep working. That single fact quietly breaks something in how we think about productivity. Ancient humans didn't need to fill idle time with more tasks. Idle time was allowed to just be idle. But rest wasn't the whole picture either. A huge portion of the day went somewhere else entirely, each other. Anthropological accounts of foraging societies consistently describe extended social time. Storytelling, teaching children skills through direct demonstration rather than formal instruction. Grooming, in a literal sense, picking through hair, a behavior shared with many primate relatives that serves both hygiene and social bonding at the same time. Long conversations with no particular agenda, often stretching late into the evening around a fire. This wasn't wasted time. Researchers studying these patterns have proposed that this social time functioned as essential infrastructure. Shared stories carried practical knowledge forward. Which plants were safe, where water could be found, which routes were dangerous, wrapped inside narratives that were far easier to remember than a flat list of facts. The campfire wasn't entertainment on top of survival. For a long stretch of human history, it may have been part of survival itself. Compare that to how information moves through your day. A notification, a headline, a message that demands a reply before you've finished reading it. Ancient humans absorbed the knowledge that kept them alive through unhurried stories told by firelight, repeated across years until they became part of how a person simply understood the world. There's another detail hiding inside this social time that's easy to miss. Who is actually doing what? Time-use research on foraging societies has found that daily activity wasn't split evenly by convenience. It followed patterns shaped by age, ability, and experience. Older members of a group, past the point of strenuous hunting or long-distance travel, often carried a huge share of childcare, tool-making, and teaching. Their days weren't defined by decline. They were defined by a shift in contribution from physical labor toward knowledge and supervision. Children, meanwhile, weren't handed a curriculum. They learned by tagging along, mimicking, and gradually taking on small real tasks long before they were considered adults. That structure meant almost no one in the group spent their day doing only one narrow thing. A single day could include foraging, tool repair, childcare, teaching, and hours of unstructured conversation, all folded into the same set of waking hours without a rigid boundary separating work from everything else. Compare that to a modern day, sliced cleanly into labeled blocks. Work, commute, chores, leisure, sleep, each treated as its own separate category, demanding its own mental switch. Then there's sleep, and this is where the picture gets genuinely surprising. You'd expect people without electric light, without screens, without central heating, to sleep in short, broken bursts at the mercy of a harsh environment. A study examining sleep patterns across 3 pre-industrial societies living in conditions resembling those of ancient humans found something almost nobody predicts. Average nightly sleep duration came out to roughly 6.5 hours, not dramatically different from average sleep duration in industrialized countries today. What did differ was structure. Bedtime wasn't fixed to a clock. It drifted with temperature, typically beginning several hours after sunset, once the air had cooled. There was no consistent use of alarms, since there was rarely a hard external reason to wake at a specific moment. Sleep followed the body's own signals far more closely than the rigid block most modern schedules demand. In other words, ancient humans weren't sleeping longer out of necessity. They were sleeping on a rhythm dictated by their own bodies and the world around them, rather than a clock hanging on a wall. There's one more detail from that same research worth sitting with. Fragmented sleep, waking briefly in the middle of the night before falling back asleep, showed up regularly and wasn't treated as a problem to fix. In many modern contexts, a person waking at 3 a.m. immediately assumes something is wrong, reaches for a phone, and starts calculating lost hours with mounting anxiety. In these ancestral sleep patterns, that same brief waking appears to have simply been part of a normal night, sometimes filled with quiet conversation with whoever else happened to be awake before drifting back into sleep without any of the alarm a modern mind attaches to it. So stack these pieces together. Several hours of focused subsistence work, long, unhurried stretches of rest and conversation, contribution that shifted with age rather than stopping at retirement, and sleep governed by temperature and light rather than a schedule or a source of anxiety. What emerges isn't a picture of constant danger and endless toil. It's closer to a life with fewer hours of labor than a great many people experience today, filled in largely by community and governed by a body that was allowed to set its own pace. That doesn't mean ancient life was easy. It carried real risks modern life mostly doesn't. Unpredictable food sources, exposure to the elements, no modern medicine when something went wrong. But the specific belief that every waking hour was consumed by relentless labor simply doesn't match what researchers have observed in societies still living close to that ancestral pattern. There's also the matter of variety, something modern schedules quietly strip away without anyone noticing. A single ancient day rarely looked identical to the one before it. Weather shifted what was available to gather. A successful hunt shifted who did what for the next few days. The season changed which plants were worth the walk. Anthropological accounts describe daily activity as responsive rather than fixed, shaped moment to moment by what the environment actually offered rather than by a plan written in advance. That responsiveness meant boredom in the flattened, repetitive sense so many people describe today had far less room to take hold. Not because ancient life was thrilling, because a day built around reacting to real, shifting conditions rarely felt like the same task performed on a loop. Compare that to a modern routine where Monday and Thursday can look nearly identical down to the hour. The same commute, the same tasks, the same screen, repeated with almost no variation demanded by the actual environment around you. Why does any of this matter to you now, sitting in a schedule built entirely around clocks and calendars? Because the contrast reveals something about what your day has quietly lost. Not the danger, not the hardship, the unstructured hours, the long conversations with no purpose beyond connection, the sleep that follows your body instead of an alarm fighting against it. Ancient humans had far less material security than you do, and in several ways, far more control over how their actual hours were spent. You inherited a body and a mind built for that older rhythm. Focused effort, followed by real rest, wrapped in long stretches of unstructured connection with other people. What you're living inside now is a structure invented far more recently than any of that, one your biology never fully adapted to. Consider how recent the modern version of a day actually is, measured against how long humans have existed. Fixed shifts, synchronized alarms, and a calendar dividing every hour into an own block are largely inventions of the last few centuries, arriving with factories, offices, and clocks built to coordinate large numbers of strangers rather than to serve any single person's body. For the overwhelming majority of human history, there was no such structure to opt into or escape. There was only the day itself and how a person and their group chose to move through it. That doesn't mean the modern structure is wrong or that anyone should try to abandon a calendar entirely. Coordinating with strangers across a city, a company, or a country requires some shared frame nobody had to build 10,000 years ago. But it does mean the exhaustion you sometimes feel by the middle of a packed week isn't a personal failure to manage time well. It's closer to friction, a body still tuned to a rhythm of variable effort and real rest, running inside a structure engineered for something else entirely. Predictability, coordination, and hours that all look the same. You wake up already behind, chasing a day that was scheduled before you open your eyes. An ancient human woke up to a day with no schedule at all, and somehow still got everything done that actually needed doing. Different pressures, different amount of time spent working, different definitions of what counted as rest, as labor, as a life well spent by the time the sun went down. And yet the same 24 hours handed to every person who has ever woken up on this planet, asking the same quiet question every morning. What will you actually do with this day? Maybe the answer isn't to abandon the calendar, the alarm, or the schedule entirely. Maybe it's smaller than that. A few unhurried minutes with no task attached. A conversation that isn't rushed toward a point. A night of sleep you let unfold instead of forcing into a rigid block. Small pieces of an older rhythm borrowed back into a day that was never really designed with your body in mind.